This video is now in session, and the House has moved a lot to the right. It moved more Republican in the 2020 election, even though Donald Trump was kicked out of the presidential White House. So, with that, Democrats have a lot of reflecting to do, but more than that, they have to maintain their majority in 2022 if they want to get anything done after the 117th Congress, which is between 2021 and 2023. So with that, Democrats need to start employing strategies now in order to make sure that their most competitive districts can go against Republican challengers. And we saw in the 2020 election how Democrats failed to do that. But Cherry Bustos, in a report today, outlines how she thinks the Democrats can still win 2022 in Trump districts, in competitive districts. And for the Republican side, the way their path to winning is pretty simple. Gerrymander states that have not been gerrymandered enough, and then the other thing is to say why you need a divided House, why you need checks and balances from the Republican Party, and then finally accuse the Democrats of socialism in their first 2 years with their first 2 years driving Congress and the White House. So how do Democrats effectively counter that? Because Democrats have a tougher road ahead than the Republican Party. Democrats already have a disadvantage because midterm cycles usually go against whoever's party the president is, and in this case, against the Democratic Party. And in addition, you also have gerrymandering by the Republican Party at a scale that the Democrats cannot match. So with that, Democrats have two disadvantages already against them coming into 2022. So how do they recover from that? It involves how you campaign. So when it comes to House elections and when it comes to congressional elections at this point, nationalization of these races is not an effective measure. We saw in 2020 how the Maine Senate race was nationalized, and a lot of donors from outside of Maine contributed into that election. And I don't mean donors from like Massachusetts or New Hampshire or Vermont, but donations from states like Texas, Florida, California, going into the Maine Senate race to either re-elect Susan Collins or to elect Sarah Gideon. And for the nationalization part, it's mostly been done by the Democratic Party, as evidenced by how most donations from Maine came from either New York or California. So with that, a lot of people in Maine did not like that, which meant that even though they were open to voting for Gideon, ultimately they didn't, because they didn't like how the Democratic Party was nationalizing their race, which they thought was supposed to be more of a local election. So with that, Susan Collins won the election in Maine. And this is repeated multiple times in multiple Senate races and as well as in House races. You can see that that in the Iowa race, nationalization hurt Teresa Greenfield. Nationalization hurt Steve Bullock of Montana, who lost to Steve Daines in the Montana Senate race in 2020. And these Senate seats are crucial for the Democratic Party. Currently, the Democrats only have 50 seats in the U.S. Senate, and any seat that they lose in 2022 means that the Republicans now will have control over the Senate. Meanwhile, in House races, nationalization is also not a good thing. If we look at races like Oklahoma's 5th District, Utah's 4th District, and then New Jersey's 2nd District. All of these races were nationalized, and as well as additional districts like Texas's 24th District. These districts that were nationalized did not go in favor of the party who tried to nationalize those races, which is why it's a good idea in 2022 to focus on the local issues. Local politics is not divisive. Local politics is not does not have as much of a competitive atmosphere as national politics. So if you focus on local issues and say that there's these local issues that I want to fix, here's how I will fix these local issues and represent you in Congress to fix them. That if you have that kind of mindset, then a lot of voters are going to agree with you more than say, I will restrict abortion, I will increase abortion rights, I will focus on racial issues. If you focus on those kinds of issues, and even if you take a moderate take on those kinds of issues, it's way worse than talking about local issues that actually matter to the voters, to the majority of your constituents, day to day. Because we see how the Republican Party has galvanized on a lot of cultural issues and put a more conservative take on it. We've seen this before with the culture wars, where Republicans focus on culture, and painting Democrat and trapping Democrats into trying to explain about these culture wars and justify their actions, even though the Democratic Party would be much better off if they focused on local issues that truly matter to the everyday person. Because we see today that even though there are a lot of these cultural issues like abortion and as well as gay rights and issues that you would see in the Supreme Court, many of those issues don't matter to a lot of constituents in these districts. A lot of people are not feminists. A lot of people don't care about LGBTQ rights, and I know that sounds a little bit malicious, but honestly, Americans are pretty ignorant these days. They care about what is important to them, and that's what Republicans have been focusing on. Even though you see a lot of national Republicans focus on culture war issues, that's just one part of the Republican equation that is meant to target Democrats and trap them into campaigning about something that isn't really that impactful for a lot of these races. Meanwhile, you have the second half of Republicans, the quieter Republicans who focus on local issues and as a result win districts for the Republican Party. We see that in the House districts like Iowa's 1st and 2nd district, and then you also see that in state legislatures. In many state legislatures, you see Republicans controlling them by very large margins, even in competitive states. For example, Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania is a competitive state. Joe Biden won it in 2020. Meanwhile, Donald Trump won it in 2016. One of its senators is a Republican. One of its senators is a Democrat. Half of the representatives in Pennsylvania are Republicans. The other half Democrats. But if you look at the state legislature, you'll see that it skews heavily towards the Republican Party. Sometimes by 20 plus seats between the Democratic and the Republican Party. Sometimes even more than that, which shows you how Republicans are good at local elections, because local politics is national politics. If you focus on the local side, you will build up a coalition that translates to a national majority. And if the Democrats do that in 2022, then they have a much better chance at retaining the majority than if they simply campaign on moderate issues, moderate cultural issues, and take a moderate spin on national issues. Because again, national issues sometimes impact people, but for the most part, local issues are more impactful to Americans day to day rather than national issues. If you focus too much on these progressive kinds of if you try to focus on progressive policies and try to justify it, or try to say I don't affiliate myself with these progressive policies, that doesn't really help with trying to persuade your constituents to vote for yourself. Constituents need a reason why to vote for you other than you being a Democrat or a Republican, and that applies to most moderate competitive districts. So what they care about, what convinces them, is if they believe that their representative has the means to solve local issues, to solve issues that pertain to them. Tax issues, local issues that relate to education. And I don't mean the cultural war issues of critical race theory, but rather how do you fund teachers in these school districts? How do you fund my child's education? How do you make sure that they get a 12-year education and that they will be able to have prosperity in their future profession? So those are the kinds of issues that impact voters, not CRT and not Black Lives Matter or the racial injustice movement or the police brutality movement or even the Blue Lives Matter movement. None of those things really matter to the core of the moderate voters. What they care about is themselves. And what they care about is how do you positively impact my life, not other people's life. And that's the winning strategy for the Democrats in 2022. Democrats, they still have like a 90% chance of losing the House in 2022, but if they employ that strategy and if they don't keep focusing on progressive politics, then at least they'll be able to blunt the shift from blue to red. And that is a winning strategy that Cherry Bustos correctly pointed out in her report of how Democrats can win in Trump districts. So I'll leave a link to this article in the description below. But those are the winning strategies, and Democrats could take a lesson from Republicans, because again, Republicans are very good at campaigning. They're very good at trapping Democrats and then using silent Republicans to then campaign in local elections to make national majorities, because once again, local elections make national majorities. So that's the end of this video. Hope you enjoyed it. This video is now adjourned, and I'll see you in the next one.